how much of the fuel on the populist fringe of politics is being fueled by concerns about Islamic extremism? I mean, what was the resonance? What's the resonance been in the markets of Charlie Hebdo? Is that purely a political phenomenon, or is that affected how people are thinking about Europe going forward, Marisa?
I mean, I think longer term, everybody expects, unfortunately, that this isn't an isolated incident. And at one point, I think people thought in the more developed worlds it was not going to be in your backyard. And then you have an event like that, and all of a sudden, it galvanizes us to say, we're all at risk. And but I would say in the near term, in terms of people's behavior in the markets, capital flows, that hasn't slowed things down. But I do think in the intermediate term, everybody has this out there as something that is a very real threat to all of us, and we need to make sure that we're cognizant of what those impacts could be. If it's an isolated moment in time, as horrible as that was, the markets didn't really stop on the day in France. So it sort of tells you that something as terrible as that, we can carry on. If this ends up being, though, something more pervasive, and it's not just Islamic extremism in the form of a bombing in a given city, I think what we're probably more worried about in that sort of camp is somebody tinkering from a cybersecurity point of view, shutting down the banking system and really threatening all that we actually know infrastructure-wise that keeps us going. If somebody wants to tinker with our energy, any one of these things that actually physically impact the way we live our lives, I would say that's probably the bigger threat than sort of an isolated bombing.
Okay, so let's move then to Ukraine, and I draw a couple of lines through the Ukraine. Normally we'd think low oil prices are a really good thing, right? There are concerns in the US, maybe they're not such a good thing, but in Europe, certainly from a distance, the fact that all those gas pipelines go through Ukraine, get to Germany, and the Russian gas is so important. How worried are you about Ukraine and all that? And why? For political reasons, for economic reasons?
Well, politically, we worry about it. I'd say just from a humanitarian standpoint, of course, it's terrible what's happening. I'd say from a market standpoint, the market's largely shrugged it off. But I do remember when I got into the business and there would be, there'd be a bomb in Tel Aviv, the market would be down 2%. Today, it seems that the market doesn't respond to geopolitical tail risk the way that it used to. And I don't know if that's because every time you sold an event in the past, the market came right back and you wish you hadn't sold, or if it's just a function of QE and so much liquidity in the system and the need for people to put money to work. But it feels to me that the market's quite complacent, in my view. If you look at valuations across equities, if you look at where credit spreads are trading, Marisa told me something yesterday I didn't realize, but the first single B bond issued at 3.75%, which is an all-time low print, which is really very remarkable to consider given all of the risks that are out there, given low growth that we have in Europe in particular, and then all the things that we've been talking about tonight.
But not good if you're trying to attract capital into Russia at the moment, you were telling me last night.
That's difficult, clearly with the political situation going on there, but also the regulatory overlay there too. So anyone in the banking system, every day we wake up and we're not sure who's on the sanctions list. And it becomes very, very difficult for any Western institution who's regulated by the US, and that's pretty much all of us on the Western side, to basically do business. And as we all know, Russia is very heavily concentrated, the wealth is concentrated with a handful of oligarchs, if you want to put it in those terms, that control a lot of the corporate world. And if somebody's on the sanctions list and you can't do business, that means you cannot raise capital for them. That includes the state-owned banks, who used to be big counterparties of ours, so that becomes difficult. So capital flows to Russia have shrunk dramatically, and part of that is the sanctions environment, and part of it is the general sort of fear of which way politically the country's going to go. And if you want to make and frankly, I think it's also inward investment into the country. So if you are a large corporate and you're thinking about making an investment in the country, do you really think you know what you're going to be owning? What you own is what you really think you're owning, and all those sorts of things about transparency and rule of law and all that. Anytime you have instability in that respect, you do see a stopping of capital flows. And by the way, I don't want to be too complacent about the sort of Islamic extremist question, because you look at countries that had huge growth prospects, and we were all piling in, at least from a banking standpoint, and it was definitely in the PE space as well, into a country like Turkey. And with the Syria issues that were happening, I think a lot of that kind of investment flow has stopped. So, you know, I think you almost have to go market by market and say how acute is the issue, and then look at sort of what the impact is.